I never thought my life would spiral this way. When I look back, I wonder if there were signs I missed, moments that hinted at the unraveling that was about to consume everything I held dear. 5 years into our marriage, Mia and I were comfortable. Not perfect, not extraordinary, but steady. We had a home in the suburbs that we both took pride in, and though life had its hiccups, I believed we were solid. I had a stable job at a marketing firm, and though I worked long hours, I thought it was for the greater good of our life together. But the day I lost my job was the beginning of the end. It was a Tuesday, late in the afternoon, when my manager called me into his office. I still remember the pit in my stomach as I sat across from him, trying to read his expression. The words came out in slow motion. "We have to let you go. Downsizing, restructuring." Whatever label they wanted to slap on it didn't matter. All I heard was, "You're no longer needed." I walked out of that office in a haze, clutching the box of my belongings, my mind racing. How would I tell Mia? What would she say? I drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My thoughts were a chaotic swirl of fear and hope. I hoped she'd understand, that she'd see how devastated I was and reassure me that we'd get through it together. That's what a partner does, right? But when I walked through the door and told her the news, I got none of that. No comfort, no encouragement, just mockery. "You lost your job?" she said, raising an eyebrow as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I nodded, trying to explain, but she cut me off with a laugh that felt like a dagger to my chest. "Well, you should have seen it coming. Honestly, it's your fault for not being prepared." Her words stung, but I told myself she was just processing the shock in her own way. Maybe it was her defense mechanism. So, I gave her space, hoping she'd come around. But she didn't. Instead, things only got worse. That night, as I lay on our bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how to fix this mess, she walked in and dropped another bombshell. "I think you should sleep in the guest room," she said casually, as if she were asking me to take out the trash. I sat up, confused. "What? Why?" She sighed, rolling her eyes like I was an inconvenience she couldn't wait to get rid of. "You're just too much of a burden to be around right now. I need space." Too much of a burden? Her words echoed in my mind as I packed a small bag and moved into the guest room. I felt like a stranger in my own home, exiled to the fringes of a life I thought we had built together. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress of the guest bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a deep, gnawing sadness, a sense of loss that went beyond the job. I had lost my partner, the person I thought I could rely on when the world came crashing down. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation and isolation. Mia barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was to make snide remarks about my lack of ambition or to remind me how useless I was now. She didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't offer any words of encouragement. Instead, she made it clear that my failure had made me unworthy of her time and attention. I tried to find a new job, sending out resumes and scouring job boards, but the rejection emails piled up like bricks in a wall I couldn't break through. And every time I came back from a fruitless day of job hunting, Mia's disdain was waiting for me. Her once loving eyes now looked at me with disappointment and, worse, contempt. It wasn't just her words that hurt, it was her actions. She stopped including me in decisions, treating me like a tenant instead of her husband. She began spending more time out of the house, going out with friends, or staying late at work. I tried to convince myself that she was just coping in her own way, but deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't just distancing herself, she was pulling away entirely. I don't know when it hit me, but one night, as I lay in the guest room listening to the faint sounds of her laughter coming from the living room, it became painfully clear. Our marriage was falling apart, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, I was the only one still fighting. That was the moment I realized I couldn't count on Mia anymore. If I was going to pull myself out of this mess, I'd have to do it on my own. But even as I resolved to pick myself up, a part of me couldn't let go of the hurt. The person who was supposed to stand by me had become my biggest critic, my harshest judge. And I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for that. It wasn't long before the cracks in our marriage turned into chasms. Mia's contempt for me grew with every passing day, But it wasn't just her words or her indifference that gnawed at me. It was her laughter. Late at night, when the house was quiet and I was lying in the guest room, I would hear her laughing. Not the forced, obligatory laughter she used to offer when we joked around, but something rich, full of life. A sound I hadn't heard from her in months. And it wasn't directed at me. The first time I heard it, I thought maybe she was on the phone with a friend, venting her frustrations or watching some comedy online. I tried to ignore it, but the laughter grew louder and more frequent over the days. My curiosity got the better of me. One night, I tiptoed down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest, and stopped at the edge of the staircase. I could hear voices, hers and another. A man's voice. I strained to listen, my mind racing. She had always been social, always had male coworkers she got along with, but something about the tone of their conversation felt different. It wasn't professional. It wasn't casual. It was intimate. Creeping closer, I peered down the stairs, careful to stay out of sight. That's when I saw him for the first time, Adam. He was lounging on the couch like he owned the place, a glass of wine in his hand and a smug grin plastered across his face. Mia was seated beside him, closer than she needed to be, her body angled toward him in a way that screamed familiarity. My stomach turned. I knew Adam vaguely. He was a coworker of Mia's, someone she had mentioned in passing a few times. I never thought much of him. A name without a face, just another colleague. But seeing him there, in my home, laughing with my wife while I was relegated to the guest room, that was a whole new level of humiliation. I clenched my fists, debating whether to confront them right then and there. But what would I even say? Accuse her of something I couldn't prove? Demand answers she would undoubtedly dodge? Instead, I retreated back to the guest room, my mind a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and despair. The next morning, I confronted her. I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. Who was that last night? I asked as she sipped her coffee, her expression annoyingly calm. Who? She replied, feigning innocence. Don't play dumb, Mia. The guy on the couch. Adam. Her lips curled into a smirk. Oh, him? He's just a friend. We were talking about work. Talking about work? At midnight? Over wine. My voice rose despite my attempt to stay calm. In our house. She rolled her eyes, setting her mug down with a loud clink. You're being ridiculous. He's a coworker. That's it. Stop being so insecure. Insecure? Mia. He was sitting on our couch like he lived here. Her dismissive laugh cut through me like a knife. You're paranoid. You know that? Maybe if you focused on getting a job instead of spying on me, you wouldn't have so much time to overthink everything. The words stung, but it wasn't just what she said. It was the way she said it. Like I wasn't even worth the effort of a real argument. Like I had become so insignificant in her eyes that she didn't care how her actions made me feel. Days turned into weeks, and Adam's presence in my life became impossible to ignore. He was always around, whether physically in the house or in the stories Mia told with a little too much enthusiasm. Adam said this, or Adam thinks that. It was like she was rubbing his existence in my face, daring me to react. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, that she was right, and my insecurities were clouding my judgment. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't just my imagination. There was something going on between them, something I couldn't ignore. The breaking point came one evening when I returned home after another fruitless day of job hunting. As I walked up the driveway, I saw Adam's car parked in front of the house. My blood boiled. I stormed inside, ready to confront them, but as I opened the door, I heard them laughing again. The sound froze me in my tracks. Peeking around the corner, I saw the two of them in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, far too close to her, while she giggled like a teenager. She looked happy, radiant even. A version of her I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. And the worst part? She wasn't like that with me anymore. I stood there, a silent observer to my own humiliation, as Adam reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away. She didn't even flinch. If anything, she leaned into his touch, her eyes lighting up in a way that confirmed everything I had feared. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart pounding, I stormed back to the guest room, slamming the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, trying to process what I had just seen. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like my entire world was crumbling beneath my feet. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I wasn't just fighting to save my marriage, I was fighting to save my dignity. And as much as it hurt to admit, I wasn't sure if there was anything left worth saving. By the time Adam's presence became a regular occurrence in my life, the humiliation had morphed into something far worse: rage. It wasn't just the fact that Mia had brought him into our home, or the way she flaunted her newfound happiness as if I didn't exist. It was the sheer audacity of her actions, the blatant disrespect, and the way she made me feel like a guest in my own life. Adam wasn't just a co-worker anymore. He was everywhere. If I wasn't hearing his laugh echoing through the walls late at night, I was finding his belongings scattered around the house. His jacket draped over a chair, his coffee mug left on the counter, his cologne lingering in the air. It was like he was staking his claim, marking his territory right under my nose. Mia didn't even bother to hide it anymore. She stopped pretending there was nothing going on. When I confronted her, her responses grew colder, sharper, and more dismissive. "Why is Adam always here?" I asked one night as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, completely ignoring me. She didn't even look up. "Because I want him here." "Do you have a problem with that?" "A problem? He's in our house, Mia. How do you not see how wrong this is?" She finally glanced at me, her expression bored. "You're overreacting. Maybe if you were actually contributing to this household, you wouldn't feel so threatened." Her words hit me like a slap to the face, but what hurt more was the lack of remorse. She didn't care how much she was hurting me. She didn't care about us anymore. Things escalated quickly after that. Adam started staying over, sometimes for days at a time. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of their laughter or the sight of his car parked in the driveway, knowing he was upstairs while I was banished to the guest room. The humiliation was unbearable, but every time I tried to stand up for myself, Mia cut me down with biting words that left me questioning my own worth. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I confronted her again, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Why are you doing this, Mia? Why are you treating me like this?" She sighed, setting her wine glass down on the coffee table with a dramatic flourish. "Because you've given me no reason to respect you. Look at you. You're pathetic. You lost your job, and now you just sulk around the house like a shadow of the man I married." Her words were like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. "I'm trying, Mia," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm doing everything I can to get back on my feet." She shook her head, her expression one of pure disdain. "It's not enough. Adam," she stopped herself, but it was too late. The damage was done. The name hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "Adam what?" I demanded, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "What does Adam have to do with anything?" She smirked, leaning back against the couch. "Adam is a real man. He doesn't make excuses. He doesn't wallow in self-pity. Maybe if you were more like him, we wouldn't be in this mess." That was it. That was the moment I realized Mia didn't just see me as a failure. She saw me as disposable. And for the first time in my life, I felt something snap inside me. The sadness, the humiliation, the endless nights of self-doubt. They all dissolved into a single, burning resolve. I wasn't going to let her or Adam destroy me. I started spending more time out of the house, not because I had anywhere to go, but because I couldn't stand being there anymore. I would sit in my car, staring at the dashboard, wondering how my life had come to this. I'd drive aimlessly through the city, letting my mind wander, trying to figure out what I could do to regain some semblance of control. It was during one of those late-night drives that I realized something. Mia wasn't going to change. She had already made her choice, and it wasn't me. But that didn't mean I had to accept it. If she wanted to tear me down, if Adam wanted to take over my life, I would make sure they both paid for it. The breaking point came a few days later. I returned home after a long day of job hunting to find Adam sitting at the dining table, eating dinner with Mia. The sight of them together, laughing and smiling as if they were the happy couple, sent me over the edge. I stormed into the room, my voice shaking with fury. "What is this?" I shouted, slamming my keys onto the table. Mia didn't even flinch. She looked up at me with an expression of mild annoyance. "Dinner," she said simply. "What does it look like?" Adam, for his part, had the audacity to grin at me. "Hey man," he said casually, as if we were old friends. "You should join us. There's plenty to go around." I wanted to punch him. I wanted to throw him out of my house and scream at Mia for letting this happen. But instead, I turned and walked away, slamming the guest room door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my chest heaving with anger, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer be the victim. I would no longer let Mia and Adam walk all over me. They thought they had one, that I was too weak to fight back. But they were wrong. The breaking point wasn't just a moment of despair. It was the beginning of my comeback. And I would make sure they both regretted ever underestimating me. Life has a strange way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it? Just when I thought I'd reached rock bottom, fate handed me an opportunity one never saw coming. That day started like every other in recent weeks, with me waking up in the cold, uncomfortable guest room and forcing myself out into the world to look for a job. Rejection after rejection had left me numb, and honestly, I was losing hope. But as I walked into the convenience store that afternoon, I never imagined my life was about to take a dramatic turn. I only went in to buy a bottle of water and maybe something to snack on. My mind was clouded with thoughts of Mia and Adam, their laughter echoing in my ears like a haunting refrain. I felt so small, so insignificant. Then, as I approached the counter, my eyes fell on the bright yellow and red display of lottery tickets. Normally, I wouldn't give them a second glance. Gambling wasn't my thing, and I didn't believe in luck. Not anymore. But something about that moment made me stop. Call it desperation, intuition, or sheer madness. But I found myself reaching for my wallet. "Give me one of those," I said to the cashier, pointing to the tickets. "Big prize this week," she said with a knowing smile as she handed me the slip. "Could change your life." I let out a bitter laugh. Change my life? Sure. But what did I have to lose? I shoved the ticket into my pocket and left the store, forgetting about it almost immediately as I sank back into my usual routine of rejection and despair. It wasn't until later that evening, as I sat alone in the guest room, that I remembered the ticket. Mia and Adam were downstairs, their voices carrying through the walls as they enjoyed yet another cozy evening together. I turned on the small TV in the corner of the room, more for background noise than anything else, and there it was, the lottery drawing, the numbers flashing across the screen. At first, I didn't even bother to look at my ticket. What were the odds, anyway? But something compelled me to pull it out of my pocket. One by one, I matched the numbers on the screen to the ones on my ticket. My heart began to race. The first number matched, then the second, and the third. By the time I realized I had matched all 6 numbers, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the ticket. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Could it be real? Was this some kind of cruel joke? But as the announcer declared the jackpot winner, the reality hit me like a freight train. I had one. Not just a little, enough to change everything. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something other than despair. A sense of power surged through me, a glimmer of hope that had been missing for far too long. But even in that moment of exhilaration, I knew I couldn't celebrate. Not yet. Mia and Adam were still downstairs, oblivious to the life-changing news that had just dropped into my lap, and I intended to keep it that way. The next few days were a whirlwind of secretive phone calls and discreet meetings with financial advisors. I cashed in the ticket quietly, making sure to keep everything under wraps. Mia never suspected a thing. She was too busy entertaining Adam, too wrapped up in her new life to notice my absence or the subtle change in my demeanor. I could have packed my bags and walked out right then and there, leaving her and Adam to their little love nest. But as tempting as that was, it didn't feel like enough. I didn't just want to leave. I wanted to take back what was mine. I wanted them to feel the sting of betrayal, the weight of humiliation, the same way they had made me feel. And then it hit me. Adam, the smug, self-assured coworker who had wormed his way into my wife's life and my home. I started digging into his background, learning everything I could about him. That's when I discovered the perfect opportunity. Adam's company, the one he constantly bragged about during his dinners with Mia, was in trouble. On the surface, it looked like a thriving startup, but beneath the facade, it was a financial disaster. They were hemorrhaging money, barely staying afloat thanks to a handful of investors who were starting to get cold feet. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Adam was desperate for cash, and I had plenty to spare. The plan began to take shape in my mind, each piece falling into place with surgical precision. I would approach Adam as an investor, someone who could save his company from collapse. I would earn his trust, gain access to his inner circle, and then, when the time was right, I would bring everything crashing down. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't the failure Mia thought I was. And if I played my cards right, I could destroy Adam's world without him ever seeing it coming. That night, as I lay in the guest room, the ticket tucked safely in the drawer beside me, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I wasn't dreading the future. I was looking forward to it. Mia and Adam thought they had me cornered, beaten, and broken. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Winning the lottery didn't just change my life. It ignited something in me. A spark of ambition, a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just some jobless man being tossed around by life anymore. I was in control now, and it was time to use that power. The days of sitting back and letting Mia and Adam trample over me were over. Adam's company was my first target. He was always bragging about it, telling Mia how he was on the verge of taking it to the next level. I did my research and found out the truth. The company was crumbling. On the surface, it looked solid. A fancy logo, a flashy website, and some buzzwords thrown around to impress investors. But underneath, it was a financial disaster. He was barely keeping it afloat, and his arrogance blinded him to just how close he was to losing everything. This was the perfect opportunity. The first step was to establish myself as a potential investor. I knew Adam would never take me seriously if I approached him as the defeated man Mia had turned me into. So, I reinvented myself. I updated my wardrobe, bought a new suit, and rented a luxury car for appearances. It was amazing how quickly people took notice when you looked the part. I reached out to Adam under the guise of a private investor interested in his company. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? He'd never paid attention to me as anything other than Mia's failure of a husband. When I introduced myself, his eyes lit up with interest. He didn't question my sudden wealth or my intentions. All he saw was the lifeline he desperately needed. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, extending his hand with a grin, "it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard a lot about you." The irony wasn't lost on me. He had no idea who I really was. "The pleasure's mine," I replied smoothly, shaking his hand. "I've done my research on your company, and I must say, I'm impressed." His chest puffed up with pride as he launched into a rehearsed pitch about the company's potential. I listened intently, nodding at all the right moments, letting him think he was in control. But behind my calm demeanor, I was already dissecting his weaknesses. The second step was to gain his trust. I attended his meetings, pretended to share his vision, and even offered ideas to improve the business. I could see the admiration in his eyes growing, the way he started to lean on me for advice. He thought I was his savior, the one person who could pull him out of the financial mess he'd created. Little did he know, I was quietly orchestrating his downfall. I began injecting small amounts of money into the company, just enough to keep it afloat while I worked behind the scenes. I wanted him to believe I was all in, that I was committed to his success. Meanwhile, I started reaching out to his investors, planting seeds of doubt about his leadership and the company's future. It wasn't hard. Most of them were already skeptical. All I had to do was give them a little push. Adam, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, continued to act like the king of the world. He'd invite me to dinner with Mia, treating me like his new best friend while she sat beside him, laughing at his jokes and basking in his charm. It was nauseating, but I played my role perfectly, smiling and nodding, all the while imagining the look on his face when everything came crashing down. Mia, for her part, seemed to relish my new role in Adam's life. She thought it was funny, ironic even, that I was helping the man who had replaced me. She had no idea what I was really doing, and that's the way I wanted it. Let her think she had one. Let her believe that I was still the same defeated man she had written off. The truth would come soon enough. The third step was the most delicate: sabotage. I started attending key meetings with Adam's partners, subtly steering conversations in ways that would hurt the company. I'd accidentally let slip confidential information that spooked investors or question Adam's decisions in ways that made him look incompetent. It was a game of chess, and I was always 3 steps ahead. But it wasn't enough to just ruin the company. I wanted Adam to feel the same sense of betrayal and humiliation I had endured. I wanted him to know what it felt like to have someone he trusted turn against him. So, I made sure that every failure, every setback, pointed back to him. By the time I was done, his investors would see him as the sole reason for the company's downfall. The best part was how blind he was to it all. He thought I was his ally, his confidant. He'd call me late at night, seeking advice or venting about the challenges he was facing. I'd offer just enough support to keep him hooked, all the while tightening the noose around his neck. Meanwhile, Mia continued to treat me like I was invisible. She'd walk past me without a second glance, her focus entirely on Adam. She had no idea that the man she had chosen over me was standing on the edge of a cliff, and I was the one who had led him there. By the time the groundwork was laid, I had positioned myself as Adam's most trusted advisor. He believed I was the key to his success, the one person who could help him turn things around. And in a way, he was right. I was the key, but not to his success, to his destruction. As I sat in my car one evening, watching the lights of the city skyline, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. Adam and Mia thought they had the upper hand, but they were about to learn a harsh lesson. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my power. And I wasn't going to stop until I had taken everything from them. If there was one thing I learned over the last few months, it was patience. Revenge isn't something you rush. It's a delicate art, requiring time and precision. I had Adam exactly where I wanted him, convinced I was his knight in shining armor, ready to rescue his failing company. But the truth was, I was slowly dismantling everything he'd built, brick by brick. And the best part? He didn't even see it coming. Adam was cocky, overconfident, even. He believed his charm and charisma could mask the glaring cracks in his company's foundation. To him, I was just another investor, someone he could manipulate and use to prop up his ego. But what he didn't know was that I was watching his every move, studying him, learning his weaknesses. He had no idea he was handing me the tools I needed to destroy him. One of the first things I uncovered was how deeply his company relied on just a handful of clients. It was a risky strategy, but Adam was too arrogant to see the danger. He boasted about his exclusive contracts, claiming they gave him leverage over his competitors. What he didn't realize was how easy it would be for me to disrupt those relationships. I started attending meetings with his key clients, always positioning myself as Adam's trusted advisor. At first, I stayed in the background, observing and taking notes. But as time went on, I began to insert myself into the conversations, subtly undermining Adam's credibility. I'd ask innocent-sounding questions that planted seeds of doubt. Are you satisfied with the timeline on this project? Or have you considered exploring other options in case this doesn't work out? The effect was almost immediate. Clients started pulling back, renegotiating contracts, and demanding more guarantees. Adam, oblivious to my role in their sudden hesitation, scrambled to reassure them, digging himself deeper into a hole. I could see the stress wearing on him, his confident facade cracking under the pressure, and it was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, I was working on another front. His investors. Adam had a few key backers who were keeping his company afloat, but they were growing increasingly restless. All it took was a few well-placed phone calls and some carefully crafted emails to push them over the edge. I posed as a concerned party, someone with inside information about the company's struggles. I didn't have to lie. Just a few carefully chosen words about missed deadlines and mounting debts were enough to make them think twice about their investments. Adam, meanwhile, was still oblivious. He continued to treat me like his right-hand man, inviting me to strategy meetings and brainstorming sessions. He even started leaning on me for advice, asking for my opinion on major decisions. I played the part perfectly, offering just enough guidance to keep him from suspecting anything. But every suggestion I made, every piece of advice I gave, was designed to push him closer to the edge. Mia, of course, was still in the picture, though she remained blissfully unaware of my plans. She spent most of her time with Adam, hanging on his every word like he was some kind of savior. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had traded me in for a man who was about to lose everything. But I kept my composure, pretending to support her and Adam while quietly working behind the scenes to tear their world apart. The real turning point came when Adam decided to expand his operations, a move I had subtly encouraged. He believed it was the key to turning his company around, but in reality, it was the final nail in the coffin. I helped him secure a loan for the expansion, knowing full well he wouldn't be able to pay it back once his clients and investors pulled out. It was a calculated risk, one that I knew would push him past the point of no return. Watching it all unfold was strangely satisfying. Adam, once so confident and self-assured, was starting to unravel. He grew increasingly desperate, calling me at all hours of the night to vent about the mounting pressure. I played the role of the supportive friend, listening patiently and offering hollow reassurances. But deep down, I was reveling in his downfall. One evening, after another long day of orchestrating Adam's collapse, I returned to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I should have felt guilty, I suppose, but I didn't. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Adam and Mia had treated me like I was nothing, like I was disposable. They had mocked me, humiliated me, and walked all over me. And now, they were finally getting what they deserved. Still, there was one last piece of the puzzle I needed to put in place. As much as I had weakened Adam's company, I hadn't completely destroyed it yet. That required a final push, one that would leave no room for recovery. I needed to take everything from him: his reputation, his livelihood, and his future. Only then would he truly understand what it felt like to lose everything. As I lay in bed that night, my mind racing with plans and possibilities, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I was no longer the broken, defeated man who had been cast aside by his wife and humiliated by her lover. I was in control now, and nothing was going to stop me. The operation was almost complete. The pieces were in place, the trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. Adam and Mia thought they had won, but they were about to learn a harsh truth. The game wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. The beauty of a plan coming together is that it's quiet at first. Like a slow burn, it builds, piece by piece, until the final collapse comes all at once. That's exactly what happened with Adam's company. For weeks, I had been setting the stage, carefully maneuvering each player, each decision, like a grand game of chess. And now, the king was about to fall. It started with his investors. The moment I pulled my money out, the ripple effect was immediate. I had carefully cultivated their doubts, planted seeds of mistrust, and now those seeds had grown into full-blown panic. One by one, they withdrew their funding, leaving Adam scrambling to fill the financial gaps. He called me, desperate for advice. "Everything's falling apart," he said, his voice strained with anxiety. "Investors are pulling out left and right. I don't know what's happening." I leaned back in my chair, phone pressed to my ear, savoring the moment. "It's a tough market right now," I said, feigning concern. "Maybe it's time to scale back, focus on the core operations." "I can't," he snapped. "We've already started the expansion. If we don't follow through, we'll lose everything." The irony wasn't lost on me. He didn't realize he'd already lost everything. It just hadn't hit him yet. Next came his clients. The contracts he had relied on to keep the company afloat were suddenly in jeopardy. My earlier whispers of doubt had done their job, and now those clients were backing out, citing concerns about the company's stability. Adam was blindsided. He called emergency meetings, begged for extensions, and made promises he couldn't keep. It was a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding, but it only made things worse. I attended those meetings, of course, sitting quietly in the corner like the loyal advisor I pretended to be, watching him squirm, His confident facade crumbling as he tried to explain away the chaos was more satisfying than I could have imagined. He was unraveling, and everyone could see it. The final blow came from the bank. The loan I had helped him secure for the expansion, the one I knew he couldn't repay, was now due. Without the investors or the clients to back him up, Adam had no way to meet the payments. The bank called in the loan, and just like that, his company was officially bankrupt. I received the news from Adam himself. He called me late one night, his voice shaking with anger and despair. "They're shutting us down," he said, as if he couldn't believe it himself. "The bank's taking everything. It's over." I could hear the disbelief in his voice, the realization that everything he had worked for was gone. It was a sound I would never forget. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "No," he muttered. "There's nothing anyone can do." He hung up, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself a smile. It wasn't just about the satisfaction of taking him down. It was the knowledge that he had finally felt what I had felt. The humiliation, the helplessness, the betrayal. He had taken everything from me, and now I had taken everything from him. But the fallout didn't stop with Adam. Mia was caught in the crossfire, her perfect little world crumbling along with his. She had hitched her wagon to his star, and now that star had burned out. She came to me one evening, her face pale and drawn. "Did you know about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did you know his company was in trouble?" I looked at her, feigning surprise. "I had no idea," I said, my tone carefully measured. "I thought everything was going well." She stared at me, her eyes searching for some hint of truth, but there was nothing for her to find. I had played my role too well. In the days that followed, Adam tried to salvage what little he had left. He sold off assets, made desperate phone calls, and tried to rebuild his reputation. But it was too late. The damage was done, and his name was now synonymous with failure. His investors wanted nothing to do with him, his clients had moved on, and his employees had scattered like leaves in the wind. Mia, meanwhile, clung to him like a drowning woman grasping at straws. But even she couldn't ignore the writing on the wall. Their dream of a life together was over, and the man she had chosen over me was now just as broken and defeated as she had made me feel. For me, it was a moment of quiet triumph. I didn't gloat, didn't throw their failure in their faces. I didn't need to. Watching them scramble, their once perfect lives reduced to rubble, was enough. I had one, and they both knew it. That night, as I sat in the guest room, the room I would soon be leaving for good, I reflected on everything that had happened. Adam and Mia had underestimated me. They had written me off as a failure, a burden, someone they could step on without consequence. But they had been wrong. The fall was complete. Adam's company was gone. Mia's loyalty was shattered, and I was finally free. Free from their mockery, their betrayal, and the pain they had caused me. I wasn't the man they had broken anymore. I was stronger, smarter, and in control. And as I prepared for the next step in my journey, one thing was clear. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. There's something surreal about watching the people who wronged you crumble under the weight of their own arrogance. Adam's empire was gone, reduced to ashes, and Mia, who had so proudly chosen him over me, was left clutching at fragments of her perfect life. But even after everything, I wasn't done. There was one final step to this journey. A reckoning that neither of them would ever forget. Mia was the first to confront me, though it wasn't the kind of apology or admission of guilt I had anticipated. No, it was more of a desperate, cornered animal kind of response. I was sitting at the dining table, casually sipping my coffee, when she stormed in, her face flushed with anger. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Don't act like you're innocent in all of this." I set my mug down and looked at her, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You've been around Adam's business this whole time, pretending to help, but somehow, everything went wrong the moment you got involved. Investors pulled out, clients disappeared. It can't be a coincidence." Her words hung in the air, but I didn't rush to respond. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, studying her, letting the silence stretch. The longer I waited, the more unnerved she became. Finally, I spoke, my tone calm and deliberate. You think I sabotaged Adam's company? Her eyes narrowed, and I saw a flicker of doubt in her expression. Doubt, but also fear. Didn't you? I shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. But if I did, wouldn't it have been justified? After everything you've done? After everything he's done? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, as if realizing that the man she had dismissed as weak and pathetic was someone entirely different now. It was a moment of clarity for both of us, but the real confrontation was yet to come. Later that evening, Adam showed up at the house. He looked like a shadow of the man he had once been. His suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, and his confidence nowhere to be found. He didn't bother knocking, barging in as if he still had some claim to my home. Mia trailed behind him, her expression a mix of frustration and desperation. "We need to talk," Adam said, his voice low and strained. I stayed seated on the couch, my arms crossed, watching him. "Talk about what?" "You know exactly what," he spat. "You've been sabotaging me. I trusted you, and you stabbed me in the back." I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. Trust is a funny thing, isn't it? Kind of like loyalty. It's only valuable if it's reciprocated. He took a step closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think this is funny? You think you've won? You ruined everything." I stood up slowly, meeting his glare with an unwavering gaze. "You ruined it yourself, Adam. You walked into my house, into my life, and acted like you were entitled to everything I had. You disrespected me, humiliated me, and took what didn't belong to you. So don't stand here and play the victim." Mia tried to intervene, her voice trembling. "This isn't helping. We need to figure out." "Figure out what?" I cut her off, turning my attention to her. "How to fix the mess you both created. How to salvage your so-called future. Don't you see? There's nothing left. You threw everything away the moment you chose him." The weight of my words silenced them both. For the first time in months, I felt truly in control, standing tall while they squirmed under the harsh light of reality. "You think this is over?" Adam finally said, his voice shaking with fury. "You'll regret this." You'll what?" I interrupted, taking a step closer to him. "Sue me? Threaten me? Good luck with that. You have nothing, Adam. No company, no reputation, no leverage." And as for Mia, I turned to look at her, my gaze piercing. She made her choice, and now she gets to live with it. Mia's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought he was the answer." I let out a bitter laugh. "The answer? The answer to what, Mia? Your boredom? Your need for validation? You thought he could give you something I couldn't, but all he did was take you down with him." She tried to step closer, reaching out as if to touch me. "Please, we can fix this. We can start over." I took a step back, shaking my head. "There's no fixing this. Not after everything. You made your choice, Mia, and now I'm making mine." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. I didn't look back, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing any trace of emotion on my face. This was their moment to face the consequences, to realize the depth of their mistakes. As I closed the door to the guest room, the room I had called my prison for so long, I felt a strange sense of peace. The confrontation was over, and I had said everything I needed to say. They had tried to break me, to strip me of my dignity and my worth, but in the end, they had only destroyed themselves. And now, it was time for me to move on. To leave this house, this chapter of my life, behind. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had faced the storm and come out stronger. And that was a victory no one could take from me. Leaving that house, the house that had been my prison, my battlefield, and ultimately my triumph, was supposed to feel like the closing of a chapter. But before I could move on, there was one final matter to settle. The house wasn't just a structure of bricks and wood. It was the last piece of the life Mia and I had built together, a life she had so carelessly destroyed. I wanted to ensure that when I walked out of those doors, it would be on my terms, not hers. Mia seemed to sense that something had shifted. After the confrontation, she grew quieter, more subdued. I could see the cracks in her armor, the way she avoided my gaze, the way her words faltered whenever she tried to speak to me. But guilt wasn't going to erase what she'd done, and it certainly wasn't going to stop me from finishing what I had started. It was during one of those awkward silences that she finally brought up the subject of the house. "I know things didn't turn out the way we planned," she began hesitantly, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "But maybe we could figure something out? About the house, I mean." I raised an eyebrow, leaning back in my chair. "What's there to figure out?" She shifted uncomfortably, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "Well, it's just, I know things between us are over, but I was thinking maybe I could stay here, just for a little while, until I figure out my next steps." Her words were a mix of desperation and entitlement, and they only solidified my resolve. She still thought she could manipulate me, still believed she had some claim to this place, even after everything. "I don't think that's going to work," I said calmly, watching as her face fell. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with panic. "I don't have anywhere else to go." I shrugged, feigning indifference. "That's not really my problem, is it? You made your choices, Mia. Now you have to live with them." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the months of humiliation, the nights spent in the guest room while she and Adam laughed in the next room, the way she had treated me like I was nothing. Any sympathy I might have had vanished in an instant. "But this is our house," she said, her voice breaking. "We built this life together." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. "Our house? Funny, I don't remember you saying that when you brought Adam into it. As far as I'm concerned, this house stopped being ours the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for you." Her face turned red, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized the gravity of the situation. "Please, I don't have anywhere else to go. Adam, he's gone. He left. I don't have anyone." It was a pathetic sight, watching her crumble before me, but I felt no pity. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. "I'll make this simple," I said, my tone cold and firm. "I bought the house outright. It's in my name now. You have no claim to it. You can pack your things and leave, or I'll have you evicted. Either way, you're not staying here." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. But there were none. She had lost, and she knew it. The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet chaos. Mia packed her belongings in silence, her once defiant demeanor replaced with a hollow resignation. I didn't offer to help. I didn't say goodbye. I simply watched as she carried box after box out the door, each one a reminder of the life we had shared, and the life I was finally leaving behind. When the house was finally empty, I stood in the living room, taking it all in. The echoes of our past lingered in the air, but they no longer held any power over me. This wasn't a home anymore. It was just a house, a place I had outgrown, and now it was time to let it go. I called my real estate agent the next day, listing the property for sale. The money wasn't the point. I had plenty of that now. It was about closing the door, both literally and figuratively, on a chapter of my life that I was ready to leave behind. I wanted a fresh start, unburdened by the ghosts of the past. As the days turned into weeks, I watched as prospective buyers came and went, each one a step closer to erasing the memories that lingered within those walls. When the sale was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a sense of freedom that had been missing for far too long. On the day I handed over the keys, I stood outside the house one last time, looking up at the windows that had once framed a life I thought would last forever. It was bittersweet, but it was also liberating. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, one that I had fought for, one that I had earned. As I walked away, the sound of the door closing behind me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The house was gone, but the lessons it had taught me would stay with me forever. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my power. And now, I was finally free to move forward. Walking away from the house that had once been the cornerstone of my life felt like shedding the last remnants of a heavy, suffocating past. But it wasn't just about the house, it was about what it represented. Every betrayal, every moment of humiliation, every time I had felt like less than myself, all of it stayed behind as I walked into a future that was finally mine to define. Mia and Adam were no longer my problems. Adam's company was gone, his reputation in ruins, and whatever future he had imagined with Mia had crumbled alongside it. As for Mia, she had begged and pleaded for a second chance, but the damage was irreparable. Forgiveness might have been an option if she had shown an ounce of remorse before her world started falling apart. But it was only when she realized she had lost everything that she came crawling back. By then, it was far too late. I had moved out of the guest room weeks before the house was sold, settling into a temporary apartment downtown while I figured out my next steps. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with mismatched furniture and a creaky floor, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace when I walked through the door, a sense of ownership over my own space. There was no Adam laughing in the next room, no Mia reminding me of my supposed failures. Just silence, the kind that brings clarity. One night, as I sat on the balcony with a drink in hand, looking out at the city lights, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. The lottery win, the sabotage, the confrontation. It all felt like something out of a movie, but it was real and it was mine. I had taken control of my life in a way I never thought possible, and the sense of accomplishment was more satisfying than I could have imagined. But as much as I had gained, I knew that revenge alone wasn't enough to build a future. The money from the lottery was a blessing, yes, but it wasn't what defined me. What mattered was what I did with it, how I used this second chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. I started small, exploring the things I had always wanted to do but had never had the time or resources for. I enrolled in a business course at the local university, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to learn how to manage the opportunities now at my fingertips. I joined a gym, started running again, and slowly rebuilt the confidence that Mia had tried so hard to destroy. But the real turning point came when I decided to invest in something meaningful. During one of my runs, I passed by a community center that had seen better days. The building was run down, the playground out back covered in graffiti, but it was still buzzing with activity. Kids played basketball on a cracked court, volunteers handed out food, and parents watched from the sidelines, their faces lit with cautious hope. Something about that place stuck with me. I found myself going back, watching from a distance, until one day I walked in and introduced myself. The director, a kind but weary woman named Ellen, welcomed me with open arms. She told me about their struggles to keep the center running, the lack of funding, the repairs they couldn't afford. I didn't tell her about the lottery. Not yet. Instead, I volunteered, showing up to help paint walls, clean up the playground, and tutor kids in math and reading. It felt good to be part of something again, to contribute in a way that wasn't tied to Mia, Adam, or my past failures. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something real. When the time felt right, I approached Ellen with an offer to fund the center's renovations. At first, she was hesitant, unsure of why someone like me would want to help. But when I explained my story, not the whole truth, just enough to make her understand, she smiled and accepted. Watching the center transform, seeing the joy on the kids' faces as they played on a brand new court or studied in a freshly painted classroom, was more rewarding than I could have imagined. As the weeks turned into months, I realized something profound. Mia and Adam didn't matter anymore. Their betrayal had once consumed me, but now it was just a distant memory, a chapter in my life that had shaped me but no longer defined me. I had found a new purpose, one that was rooted not in revenge but in growth, in the quiet satisfaction of building something good out of the ashes of my past. I heard about Mia occasionally through mutual acquaintances. She had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, still trying to piece her life together. Adam, last I heard, had left the city altogether, chasing some pipe dream of rebuilding his career elsewhere. I felt no anger toward them anymore, only a strange sort of pity. They had both burned their bridges, and now they were facing the consequences. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, a spacious, modern place I had purchased with part of the lottery winnings, I found myself smiling. The skyline stretched out before me, a reminder of how far I had come. I wasn't the man Mia had tried to destroy, nor was I the man Adam had mocked and underestimated. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone better. The final victory wasn't about taking them down. It wasn't about the house, the money, or even the revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, finding my purpose, and proving to myself that I was more than the sum of my past mistakes. As I raised my glass to the horizon, I whispered a silent goodbye to the man I used to be and welcomed the future with open arms.